I dare you to watch this without getting emotional. This story will hit you differently. A billionaire left for 1 month on business, trusting his fiancée to run his house with kindness. When he came back, he expected warm smiles and a happy home. Instead, he found his maid's arm in a cast, trembling on her knees, gathering scattered garbage from the front lawn while his fiancée stood over her in a golden gown, arms crossed, cold as stone. The staff wouldn't look him in the eye. The maid wouldn't either, not out of guilt but out of fear. Something had happened in that house while he was gone. Something no one wanted to explain. And when he finally learned the truth about what his fiancée had done, it didn't just break his heart. It changed the rest of his life. But first you need to see how it began. Hey everyone, welcome back. Before we dive into today's story, drop a comment and let me know, where are you watching from tonight? I love seeing where this community comes from all over the world. If you're new here, consider subscribing because we tell real, emotional stories every single week, and trust me, you will not want to miss the ending of this one. There's a twist coming that I promise you won't see coming. Let's begin. But nobody at that mansion expected the quiet housekeeper to become the reason a billionaire's whole world would fall apart. The Whitmore estate sat at the top of a hill in Connecticut, surrounded by iron gates and rows of manicured hedges that looked like they'd been trimmed with a ruler. 34-year-old Ethan Whitmore had built his fortune from nothing. A tech company that started in a garage and turned into an empire that employed thousands. He wasn't the kind of billionaire who flaunted his money. He drove himself to work most days. He remembered the names of every person on his household staff. And more than anything, he believed that how you treated the people who couldn't fight back said everything about who you really were. That belief was the reason he'd hired Maria Alvarez 3 years ago. Maria was 29. A single mother raising her son on her own after her husband passed away in a construction accident. She'd walked into Ethan's office for the housekeeping interview with her resume trembling slightly in her hands, and when he'd asked her why she wanted the job, she hadn't given some polished answer. She just said quietly, "Because my son deserves better than what I can give him right now. And I'm willing to work harder than anyone you've ever hired to make sure he gets it." Ethan hired her on the spot. Over the years, Maria became more than staff. She learned how he liked his coffee. She remembered his late mother's birthday and always left a small candle lit in the study on that day without ever being asked. She was quiet, careful, and endlessly kind. The kind of person who noticed when the gardener seemed tired and brought him water before he had to ask. Everyone in that house respected her. Everyone except one person. 6 months ago, Ethan had gotten engaged to Vanessa Cole, a 31-year-old former event planner with sharp cheekbones, an even sharper tongue, and a smile that could freeze a room if you looked closely enough. She was beautiful, charming in public, and utterly convincing. Especially to Ethan, who was so wrapped up in building his next company that he didn't always notice the way Vanessa's eyes changed when she thought no one important was watching. The staff noticed, though. They always do. "She looks at Maria like she's something she stepped in," the head gardener, old Tom, had muttered to the cook one afternoon, watching from the kitchen window as Vanessa swept past Maria in the hallway without so much as a glance. The cook had only sighed. Some people can't stand kindness. Makes them feel small. A month ago, Ethan had been called away for an emergency merger overseas. A deal so large it required him to be in Singapore for 4 straight weeks, with almost no communication back home. Before he left, he'd pulled Vanessa aside in the foyer, her hands in his voice full of trust. "Take care of the house while I'm gone," he'd said. "Take care of everyone in it." Vanessa had smiled that beautiful practice smile. "Of course, baby. You don't have to worry about a thing." He'd kissed her forehead and walked out the door, completely unaware that the moment his car disappeared down the driveway, something in Vanessa's expression shifted, like a mask sliding off to reveal what had been underneath the entire time. That first night, Vanessa gathered the household staff in the living room. "Things are going to be different while Ethan's away," she said, her voice calm but edged with something colder. "I run this house now. And I expect things to be done exactly the way I want them. Maria stood near the back of the group, holding a stack of folded towels, saying nothing. She'd learned long ago that silence was often the safest choice. But silence wouldn't save her. Not this time. Because over the next 4 weeks, Vanessa began finding reasons, small, invented, cruel reasons, to single Maria out. A dish left slightly out of place became carelessness. A moment of exhaustion after a 14-hour shift became laziness. And with each passing day, the cruelty grew sharper, more personal, more designed to break something inside a woman who had never done anything but work hard and love her son. The other staff watched, helpless, afraid to speak up in case they became targets too. And Maria said nothing. She just kept working, kept her head down, kept sending most of her paycheck home to her son's school fund. Because that boy's future was the only thing that mattered to her. She had no idea that the worst was still coming. She had no idea that in less than 2 weeks, an accident in that very house would leave her arm broken. And that what happened afterward would be far more painful than any physical injury. What Vanessa did after the accident left even the household staff too afraid to speak. It happened on a Tuesday morning, 10 days before Ethan was due to return. Maria had been carrying a stack of dishes down the back staircase. A staircase that had been slick with cleaning solution because another staff member had just finished mopping it and hadn't put up a warning sign. Her foot slipped on the 3rd step from the bottom. She threw her arm out instinctively to catch herself, and the sickening crack that followed echoed through the hallway. She hit the floor hard, dishes shattering around her, pain shooting up her arms so intense that for a moment the world went white. The kitchen staff came running. Old Tom scooped her up as gently as he could, cradling her arm against her chest while she bit back sobs, not from the pain alone, but from the fear that immediately followed it. How am I going to work like this? How am I going to pay for my son's tuition if I can't work? They rushed her to the hospital. The diagnosis: a fractured radius requiring a cast for 6 to 8 weeks and strict doctor's orders to avoid heavy lifting or repetitive strain. When Vanessa found out, her first words weren't about Maria's well-being. How long is she going to be useless for? She asked the house manager, not even lowering her voice, standing just feet away from where Maria sat with tears still drying on her cheeks. The house manager, a kind older woman named Delphine who had worked for the Whitmore family for over a decade, felt her stomach turn. "Ma'am, she just broke her arm. She needs time too. She needs to still do her job," Vanessa cut in. "I'm not paying someone a full salary to sit around." Delphine's mouth opened then closed. She didn't have the authority to overrule her, not while Ethan was gone. And so, against every instinct screaming inside her, she said nothing more. The next morning, Vanessa handed Maria a list. It wasn't a light-duty list. It was the same list Maria always did: scrubbing floors, hauling laundry, cleaning windows. Except now she had one arm in a cast and searing pain every time she tried to grip anything. "I don't understand," Maria said quietly, staring at the paper, her voice shaking. "The doctor said I can't lift." "The doctor doesn't sign your paycheck," Vanessa said, not even looking up from her phone. "I do. For now." Maria's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded because what choice did she have? Her son needed that paycheck. And she couldn't risk losing this job, not with medical bills from the hospital visit already stacking up, not with a boy back home who believed his mother could handle anything. So Maria worked. One-armed, in pain, gritting her teeth through tasks that should have taken 2 functioning hands, trying not to cry in front of the other staff because she didn't want anyone's pity. She just wanted to survive the next 10 days until Ethan came home and things could go back to normal. But normal wasn't coming back. Not the way she thought. Because 3 days before Ethan's return, Vanessa did something that crossed a line no one in that house believed she'd actually cross. She threw a party. Not a small gathering, a full garden party, over 60 guests, caterers, a live band, decorations flown in from 3 different states, all to celebrate what she called her final month running the estate before Ethan returned. It was, in truth, entirely for herself, a way to show off to her wealthy friends that she was already the lady of the house. And she ordered Maria, arms still in a cast, still healing, still in visible pain, to help set it all up. Then clean it all up. Alone. While the other staff were reassigned to guest-facing roles that Vanessa deemed more important. The party lasted until nearly 2 in the morning. Music, laughter, expensive champagne spilled carelessly onto the grass. And when it ended, Vanessa didn't call in extra help for cleanup. She stood on the mansion's front steps in her golden gown, watching Maria kneel on the lawn in the pale morning light, gathering trash bag by bag with one working arm, tears sliding silently down her face, not just from the pain radiating through her broken bone, but from something deeper. Exhaustion. Humiliation. Heartbreak. Faster, Vanessa called out from the steps, sipping the last of her champagne. Guests are gone. I want this lawn spotless before noon. What Vanessa didn't know, what no one on that lawn knew yet, was that a black car had just turned onto the long driveway. Ethan was 3 days early, and he was about to see everything. What Ethan saw the moment he stepped out of that car would haunt him for the rest of his life. The flight home had been unbearable. 4 weeks of overseas negotiations, of hotel rooms that all blurred together, of missing his home so much it physically ached. Ethan had wrapped up the merger 2 days ahead of schedule and immediately booked the earliest flight back, wanting to surprise Vanessa, wanting to walk through his own front door and finally breathe. He hadn't called ahead. He wanted it to be a surprise. As the car rolled up the long gravel driveway, Ethan leaned forward, smiling at the familiar sight of his home rising over the hill. But as they got closer, his smile began to fade. Trash bags, scattered wrappers, crushed cups littered across the once immaculate lawn like a storm had rolled through, or a party that had gotten wildly out of hand. And then he saw her. Maria. On her knees in the grass, her right arm in a white cast, her left hand shaking as she tried to stuff garbage into a bag that kept sliding away from her. Her hair had come loose from its usual neat bun, sticking to her tear-streaked face. Her whole body trembled, not from cold but from sheer exhaustion. And standing above her, arms crossed, dressed like she was heading to a red carpet instead of standing over an injured woman in the dirt, was Vanessa. The car hadn't even fully stopped before Ethan threw the door open. Maria. His voice cracked through the quiet morning air like thunder. Maria's head snapped up, eyes widening in shock, then filling instantly with fresh tears. This time tears of relief so overwhelming she nearly collapsed forward into the grass. Mr. Whitmore, she whispered, trying desperately to wipe her face, to compose herself, to stand, as if she could somehow hide what he'd already seen. Ethan was already moving, crossing the lawn in long, furious strides, his suit jacket flapping behind him, his jaw tight with a rage none of the staff had ever witnessed in 3 years of working for him. Don't, he said gently, kneeling beside her immediately, his voice softening the second he was close enough to see the pain etched into her face. Don't get up. Maria, what happened to your arm? I fell, she whispered. On the stairs. 10 days ago. Ethan's eyes flicked to her cast, then to the scattered trash covering the lawn, then finally, slowly, dangerously, up to Vanessa, who stood frozen on the steps, her champagne glass still in hand, the color draining from her face. 10 days ago, Ethan repeated, his voice deathly quiet. And she's out here. On her knees. Cleaning up trash. With a broken arm. Ethan, I can explain. Explain, he said, standing slowly. Why my fiancé let an injured employee work through a garden party instead of getting her the medical leave she needed. Vanessa's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time since he'd known her, Ethan watched her search for words and come up completely empty. She still had 2 working hands technically, and I thought. You thought. Ethan's voice rose, and for the first time several members of the staff who had gathered near the windows saw something in him they'd never seen before. Not just anger but heartbreak. The heartbreak of realizing the person he'd promised his future to was someone he didn't actually know at all. He turned back to Maria, crouching again, his voice gentle. "How long has this been happening?" Maria hesitated. Loyalty and fear warred visibly across her face. "Sir, please, I don't want any trouble." "You're not in trouble," Ethan said, his voice cracking slightly. "I need to know the truth. Please." And that's when Delphine, the house manager, stepped forward from the doorway, unable to stay silent any longer, her own eyes glistening. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, her voice trembling but resolute, "there's something you need to see. It's in the security footage from the past month." Ethan's stomach dropped. "Show me," he said. "Show me everything." Vanessa's champagne glass slipped from her fingers and shattered against the stone steps. No one moved to clean it up. What the security footage revealed made Ethan's blood run cold. The study fell into heavy silence as Delphine pulled up the footage on the estate's monitoring system, her hands shaking slightly as she scrolled back through weeks of recordings. Ethan stood behind her, arms crossed so tightly it looked like he was holding himself together by force. Maria sat in the corner of the room, wrapped in a blanket someone had draped over her shoulders, sipping tea she hadn't touched, staring at the floor. The first clip loaded. It was from the kitchen, dated 2 weeks earlier. Vanessa stood over Maria, who was struggling to reach a high shelf with her uninjured arm while balancing a tray in the other. Pre-injury footage before the fall. Vanessa's voice came through the speakers, sharp and cold. "Is this really the best you can do? I've seen toddlers move faster." Maria said nothing in the footage, simply nodded and kept working. Ethan's jaw clenched. The second clip was worse. The stairwell the day of the accident. The footage showed the wet, unmarked steps, showed Maria's foot slipping, showed her crashing down with a sickening tumble that made Ethan flinch even watching it on a screen. But what came after made his hands curl into fists. Vanessa arrived at the scene within a minute, not to help but to check her phone, visibly annoyed by the interruption to her morning. "Someone get her up. I have calls in 10 minutes, her voice said flatly in the recording, barely glancing at Maria writhing in pain on the floor. "Turn it off," Ethan said, his voice hoarse. "There's more," Delphine said quietly. "You need to see the rest." The final clip was from 3 nights ago, the night of the party. It showed Vanessa standing on the balcony above the lawn, watching Maria struggle to carry folding chairs one-handed, her cast clearly visible even from that distance. And instead of concern, instead of any flicker of humanity, Vanessa was laughing, actually laughing, turning to a friend beside her and saying words that made Ethan's stomach twist violently. "Watch this, it's honestly kind of pathetic. I told her if she can still hold a fork, she can still hold a broom." The room went completely silent. Ethan stood frozen, staring at the screen, at the version of his fiancée he'd never seen. The version that only came out when she believed no one who mattered was watching. He turned slowly toward the doorway where Vanessa now stood, having followed them in, her earlier bravado completely gone, replaced by something closer to panic. "Ethan, I can explain that. It was a joke. It was just a joke." His voice was barely above a whisper, which was somehow more terrifying than if he'd shouted. "You watched an injured woman struggle in pain and you called it a joke." "She's staff, Ethan," Vanessa said, some of her old sharpness returning, a desperate defensiveness creeping into her tone. "I don't understand why this is such a big deal. People like her are used to hard work. That's literally her job." The room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Old Tom, standing near the door, actually gasped audibly. Delphine closed her eyes. Anne-Maria, still wrapped in her blanket in the corner, simply lowered her head, tears silently sliding down her cheeks, not from anger, but from the quiet devastation of hearing confirmed what she'd feared the entire time, that to Vanessa she had never been a person at all. Just a tool. Disposable. Beneath consideration. Ethan turned to look at Maria, and something in his chest cracked wide open. People like her, he repeated slowly, worked 18-hour days with a broken arm because she was too afraid to say no to you. Because she needed this job to take care of her son. And you knew that. You knew exactly how much power you had over her, and you used it to make her suffer for your own entertainment. Ethan. I trusted you with my home, he said, his voice finally breaking, raw with a pain that had nothing to do with anger anymore and everything to do with grief. The grief of losing the future he thought he'd been building. I trusted you with the people I care about. And you turned this house into something cruel the second you thought I wasn't watching. Vanessa's eyes welled up, but even now Ethan could see it wasn't remorse. It was the panic of someone realizing they'd been caught, not someone realizing they'd been wrong. What are you saying? She whispered. Ethan looked at the ring on her finger. The ring he'd chosen so carefully, the ring that represented every hope he'd had for their future. I'm saying, he said quietly, that I need you to leave my house tonight. But what Ethan did next shocked everyone in that room, including Maria herself. The house fell into a tense, heavy stillness after Vanessa was escorted upstairs to pack, flanked by 2 staff members who watched her every move, not out of cruelty, but because after everything they'd witnessed over the past month, no one trusted her not to do something else vindictive on her way out. Ethan sank down onto the couch across from Maria, running a hand through his hair, looking suddenly exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with jet lag. Maria, he said softly. I am so sorry. I should have called more. I should have checked in. If I had known. You couldn't have known, Maria said quietly, finally lifting her eyes to meet his. I didn't want to bother you. You were dealing with something important. Nothing, Ethan said firmly, is more important than someone getting hurt in my own home and being forced to suffer in silence because she was afraid of losing everything. Maria's lower lip trembled. She pressed the blanket tighter around her shoulders, and for the first time since he'd known her, Ethan watched the careful, composed woman who never complained finally let herself cry openly in front of him. I just didn't want to lose this job, she whispered. My son, he's 12. He's smart, Mr. Whitmore. Smarter than me. He wants to be a doctor someday. And I can't give him a future if I don't have this paycheck. I would have done anything to keep it. Even this. Ethan felt something in his chest tighten painfully. You should never have had to choose between your dignity and your son's future, he said. Never. Not in my house. Not anywhere. He reached for his phone and made a call right there in front of her. First to his personal physician, arranging for Maria to be seen by the best orthopedic specialist in the state, first thing the following morning, regardless of what the original hospital had recommended. Then to his lawyer, quietly instructing him to draw up a document, though he wouldn't reveal exactly what it was for, not yet. What are you doing? Maria asked, watching him with confusion. Making things right, Ethan said simply. Or at least starting to. Over the following days, as Vanessa's belongings were removed from the estate and the engagement quietly, publicly ended, with Ethan releasing only a brief statement about circumstances that revealed fundamental differences in values, the household began to breathe again. Old Tom whistled while trimming the hedges for the first time in weeks. Delphine caught herself smiling at breakfast. Even the caterers who'd worked the party mentioned to a friend that the whole house just felt lighter. But it was Maria who seemed most transformed, not because her circumstances had changed dramatically overnight, but because for the first time in a month she wasn't bracing herself for the next cruelty. She could breathe. She could heal, both her arm and something deeper that had been worn down by weeks of silent suffering. Ethan insisted she take a full paid leave to recover. Not light duty, not modified tasks, but complete rest, with her salary continuing in full. When she protested, worried it was too generous, too much, Ethan simply shook his head. You've given this family 3 years of loyalty and hard work, he said. The least I can do is make sure you're taken care of when you need it most. 2 weeks later, her cast still on but the pain finally manageable, Maria was called into Ethan's study. She walked in nervously, unsure what to expect, twisting her fingers together as she took the seat he offered. On the desk in front of her sat a folder. "What's this?" she asked. "Open it," Ethan said, and there was something in his voice, an emotion he was clearly trying to hold steady, that made her hands tremble as she reached for it. What she found inside would leave her speechless. What was inside that folder changed Maria's life forever, and revealed something about Ethan that no one, not even his closest friends, ever knew. Maria opened the folder slowly, her breath catching as she read the first page. It was a full scholarship trust, fully funded, covering tuition, housing, and living expenses for her son through undergraduate and medical school, at any university he was accepted into. Beneath it, a second document. Full ownership transfer of a small but comfortable 3-bedroom home in a quiet neighborhood 20 minutes from the estate, already paid in full, already in her name. Maria's hands shook so hard the papers nearly slipped from her fingers. "Mr. Whitmore, I don't understand. This is too much. I can't accept this." "You can," Ethan said gently, "and you will. Because it's not charity, Maria. It's overdue justice." Tears streamed freely down her face now, but these were different tears than the ones on the lawn weeks earlier. Tears of a disbelief so profound it felt like her chest might burst open from the weight of it. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do all of this for me?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment, staring down at his hands before he finally spoke, revealing something he had never told anyone at the estate, not even his closest friends. "When I was 7 years old," he said slowly, "my mother worked as a housekeeper. Not unlike you. For a family who treated her exactly the way Vanessa treated you, like she was invisible. Like her pain didn't matter as long as the house looked perfect. I used to watch her come home every night, exhausted, her hands cracked and bleeding from cleaning chemicals, and she'd still find the energy to help me with my homework because she believed, she knew, that education was the only way I'd ever have a different life than hers." He looked up, his eyes glassy. "She worked herself to the bone so I could become someone. And I built this entire empire standing on her sacrifice. When I saw you on that lawn, on your knees in pain, I didn't just see my employee. I saw my mother. And I swore to myself right there that I would never again let someone in my home suffer the way she suffered. Invisible, disposable, unheard." Maria pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. "Your mother," she managed. "She must be so proud of who you've become." Something flickered across Ethan's face, grief carefully contained. "She passed away 6 years ago, before I sold my first company. She never got to see any of this." He gestured vaguely at the study, the estate beyond the windows. "But I think about her every single day. And I think she would have loved you, Maria. I think she would have seen in you exactly what I see. Someone who never stopped fighting for her child no matter what it cost her." The room fell into a silence that felt sacred, heavy with everything unsaid and everything finally understood. "There's one more thing," Ethan said, wiping his eyes and reaching for a third document. "I'd like to offer you a new position if you're willing. Head of Household Operations. Full benefits, a staff of your own to manage, a salary that actually reflects the value of everything you've given this family for 3 years. And going forward, no one in this house ever again will be treated as anything less than what they are, essential, respected, and seen." Maria couldn't speak. She simply nodded through her tears, clutching the folder to her chest like it might disappear if she let go. Word of what happened spread quietly through the small, tight-knit community of household staff across the wealthy Connecticut suburb, not as gossip, but as something closer to hope. A reminder passed from housekeeper to gardener to nanny, that somewhere out there was an employer who saw them, who valued them, who understood that kindness cost nothing and meant everything. 6 months later, Maria's son was accepted into a prestigious pre-med program on a full scholarship. One he'd earned entirely on his own merit, with the security of knowing his mother's sacrifice had finally been honored rather than exploited. Ethan? He never publicly discussed what happened with Vanessa beyond that single brief statement. But those who knew him best said he seemed different afterward. Softer somehow, more present, more attentive to the people around him. He started a foundation in his mother's name, providing financial support and educational scholarships to the children of domestic workers across the state, ensuring that no other family would have to choose between dignity and survival. Maria still works at the estate today, though the dynamic has changed entirely. She's respected, valued, heard. And every year, on the anniversary of that terrible morning on the lawn, Ethan sends her a small bouquet of flowers with a note that simply reads, "Thank you for reminding me what truly matters." Because sometimes, the people who suffer in silence are the ones who end up changing everything. Not through anger, not through revenge, but simply through the quiet, unbreakable dignity of enduring with grace, until someone finally sees them the way they always deserve to be seen. This story is a powerful reminder that true character is revealed not in how we treat those who can benefit us, but in how we treat those who have no power to fight back. Kindness costs nothing, but its absence can cost everything. And sometimes, the people we overlook the most are the ones carrying the heaviest burdens with the quietest strength. If this story moved you, give it a like, drop a comment telling me which moment hit you hardest, and subscribe for more emotional stories every week. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that dignity matters. Thank you for watching until the end. I'll see you in the next story.